Fox News Alert, and just a few minutes from now, we will hear from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in his first on-camera news conference since the Taliban took over Afghanistan. That's been a lot of days. And with only 6 days left until the president's self-imposed deadline to pull out U.S. troops. You're watching Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, my co-hosts, Emily Campagno and Kayleigh McEnany, former State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus, and in the center seat today, Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary and Fox News contributor. Hello, everyone. It's going to be another busy hour here on Fox. Just a short time ago, the Pentagon held an update on Afghanistan, suggesting that once we're out, we won't be coming back.
Do you have an agreement with any NATO allies to keep, like the Turks, to keep the airport open after the U.S. military pulls out? When
the mission is over and when we are leaving the airport will not be the United States our responsibility anymore.
President Biden getting some serious pushback now from all sides of the political aisle.
The deadline is when the mission is accomplished and we bring our people home. Full stop.
It's the most dishonorable thing a commander-in-chief has done in modern times. There's no way in hell we get all the American citizens out. We're going to leave thousands of Afghans who fought along our side behind, and we're setting the table for the rise of al-Qaeda and ISIS to attack us down the road.
I do not believe that this can be accomplished by August 31st, and I've requested that the SecDef and SecState encourage the president in the strongest possible terms to reconsider that deadline.
I mean, this is going to be a big deal for decades. This is going to be covered as one of the worst catastrophes in American foreign policy history.
So, Morgan, I want to drill down on that just a bit, because when people leave the country, they have to flash their passports. Everything's digitalized now. How in the world can we not know which Americans are over there in Afghanistan? I mean, it's not like it's a tourist destination in a pandemic and people trying to sneak to get there.
Yeah, so we've got a couple different issues going on, Harris. Number one, you would think in the months leading up to this withdrawal, since the president announced it in April, that we would have started pulling those lists together and getting that information together. One of the things that the State Department relies on around the world is something called SAFE, this system where people are supposed to register with the U.S. Embassy so that they know they're there, they know they're present. So you've got one problem in that this should have been done ahead of time. And then the next problem, we'll see what Secretary Blinken says in the next hour whenever he's supposed to go to the podium, if they've been able to get that number to us. But an important point, Harris, this is not the first time that we have had to evacuate Americans out of a crisis. Last year, during COVID, when the world shut down and commercial airliners shut down, Mike Pompeo and his State Department, we had to evacuate and repatriate almost 100,000 Americans from around the world.
Yes.
This was a huge logistical feat. So it's important to note that the State Department can do this. There is the capabilities, but they have to have the right political leadership in place. Secretary Pompeo empowered our undersecretary, who's essentially like the COO of the State Department, to get this done, and he put people directly reporting to him who would be accountable for getting 100,000 Americans home. To me, the question is, why has Secretary Blinken still not done that? Where is the point of failure at the State Department? Who's responsible? Is anyone in this entire administration going to be held accountable for this debacle? I don't think they're going to fire anybody. They just hope in the next few weeks they'll quit looking at it.
This is tragedy upon tragedy, Harris, and I think the worst part for me as an ordinary American is the notion that this was in some way preventable. The notion that if there was some modicum of actual leadership from our commander-in-chief, actual transparency, if there was an ability to listen to the multitudes of plans submitted to him all across the government by veterans, by the State Department, by the Department of Defense, and more, that there would be a more seamless transition, a better extraction than the absolute surrender and abandonment we have seen up until now. And I'd like to hear more from Morgan on this, because, Morgan, I think you touched on such a valuable point, which is that in the refusal to delegate any type of responsibility or power, that is why everything is sort of bunching at the top. We're hearing from all aspects throughout the government, and again with ordinary Americans, saying we have a chartered flight, we have everything available, but we're missing a permit to land, for example. We're hearing from Congressman Gallagher saying, why do we keep surrendering our power to the executive branch? We have more power than standing at a microphone. Let's pass legislation and get these Americans and allies and animals home. So Morgan, what is your insight, if any, into that, what we're seeing, that bunching at the top, resulting in, I think, inevitably loss of life?
Well, just quickly, I think whenever you have a lot of people in charge, you have no one in charge. So one of the things that Congress will need to get to the bottom of is, where is the point of failure at the State Department? Why weren't these civ applications being processed? What happened between April and August? I think that's going to be the crucial question. At the State Department under Mike Pompeo, he made sure that people were appointed to positions and they were in charge and they were held accountable by him if they weren't delivering. Trust me, I've been in the room when he's had to hold people accountable.
And Morgan, we had the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy that did criticize the president for this, and he also brought up our pierced credibility on the world stage. He said essentially that, you know, in response to the fact that this is a NATO mission, that there are other countries begging us to extend the deadline past August 31st to extract their citizens safely as well. We'll get a shot of this for a moment. Get your thoughts on the other side.
I think he's ruined our reputation on a world stage. I think he's allowing the Taliban to direct our reputation, but more importantly, our foreign policy. When you have countries such as the UK and France that are in Afghanistan for only one reason, that America was attacked, that are begging us to extend the deadline past the 31st so they can get their citizens out, that the president sides with the Taliban because the Taliban told him when, that is a very sad day for America.
So I love Ari. I think he's brilliant. I disagree with him on whether, you know, about criticizing the president about not taking questions yesterday. I can sort of understand that early on when you're making an important speech, but this isn't a speech about just, you know, infrastructure spending or even booster shots on COVID, things that are all important. We're in the middle of an international crisis. We're in the middle of potentially thousands of Americans being left in Afghanistan, allies being left there. This is the worst catastrophe that I have seen on the international stage in my entire national security career. So you have to answer questions when that happens. And if you're not up to the job, if you're not capable of doing it, then you shouldn't be the president. So I think in the next election in 3 years, when we go to choose another president, we should make sure to actually ask questions of these candidates. They should not be able to campaign from the basement. They should be held accountable, and they shouldn't be treated with kid gloves. This is what happens whenever you don't require anything of a presidential candidate during election. This is who leads.
President Biden and the new Israeli prime minister are set to meet at the White House tomorrow to talk about Iran. But critics are questioning how the president can effectively negotiate on Iran given his decades of failed foreign policy. Among them, his handling of the Iraq troop withdrawal, which ultimately led to the rise of ISIS. Even former Defense Secretary Robert Gates is blasting his former VP. In his 2014 memoir, Gates praises Biden as a man of integrity, but then adds, quote, "I think he's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades." And Gates only reaffirmed that assessment in 2019.
Would he be an effective commander-in-chief?
I don't know. I stand by that statement. We disagreed significantly on Afghanistan and some other issues. I think, as I say elsewhere in the memoir, I think that the vice president had some issues with the military. So.
Yeah, you think? I mean, Morgan, just compare the Obama-Biden record in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and that of President Trump. He secured Afghanistan with only 2,500 American soldiers there, got rid of ISIS in Syria and Iraq. There's really no comparison as Biden tries to blame President Trump amid this catastrophe.
So one of the things, Kaylee, that I talked about on Hannity last night, actually, is that I think that President Biden and his team don't fundamentally understand what we mean when we talk about negotiating from a position of strength. I mean, listen, if you look at Adam Bowler, for example, who negotiated with the Taliban, was on Fox and Friends this morning. If you look at Secretary Pompeo and others, when those men who were empowered by President Trump, when they went in the room with the Taliban and talked to them, this was after we took out Qasem Soleimani, the world's largest terrorist in Iran, for example. So whether it's dealing with Iran and the JCPOA, whether it's dealing with the Taliban in Afghanistan, whether it's dealing with the Chinese Communist Party, right? It doesn't matter, or the Russians, whomever it may be. When you do things, when you make policy decisions that I think are in effect capitulating to your adversaries, they smell the weakness, right? They smell it coming a mile away. So whenever you allow the Russians to build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline without sanctions, the Russians go, okay, know where their red line is, right? And you could go through example after example what all of these things have in common. Iran, Taliban, Afghanistan, Chinese Communist Party, Russians, Venezuela, where we're talking about potentially removing sanctions from Maduro. All of these situations have in common that I think fundamentally they are uncomfortable with the idea of American strength and American presence on the world stage and using that American power in those negotiations. You have to be able to do that if you want to be effective.
As the Taliban strengthens its grip on Afghanistan, more stories of oppression against women emerge, despite the Taliban vowing to be kinder and gentler. Listen to what a Taliban spokesman tells our own Trey Yangst.
Will women in Afghanistan now have access to things like secondary education?
Yes, yes. Secondary education, higher education, yes.
And in terms of their place in society, will they be considered equal?
Yes, they will. They can have access to work, to the various jobs. But only the thing is that they have hijab.
However, women in Afghanistan are telling a different story. As one female journalist there tells Fox News, she fears for her life and was forced to go into hiding.
If they find me, they will kill me. Every day I'm changing my address to be sure that they can't track me. The Taliban can't track me down. They can't search for me. They can't find me. So I don't know how long I can do this because I've already visited my family members' houses. I can't go. I can't put more people in danger because of myself. They are checking for the people who always talked against them. And for me, I was one of the people, and I was one of the females who always talked against Taliban in the media, because what they did to the women, what they did to the innocent people in Afghanistan, what they did to the children in Afghanistan, they burned them, they killed them.
That was exclusive Fox News digital footage. Morgan, your thoughts?
Well, my heart goes out to this female journalist in Afghanistan. I don't know for how long she can continue to go from address to address to address. And it's really people like that. Those are the faces and the voices of the people that we are leaving behind. And I think it's important for us to look at that and know that our decisions have ramifications and consequences. Not that we could have stayed in Afghanistan for forever. Again, it's about the execution of this drawdown and of this withdrawal that have left so many people in perilous conditions like this brave woman. The one thing I will say, though, is that the women who are working adults in Afghanistan right now, they're not the same women that were there when the Taliban was in charge 20 years ago. I've seen pictures and videos of them protesting still, despite the fact that the Taliban is out in force. There's a lot of brave and courageous women there that I've spoken to. I was in Afghanistan in 2017, speaking to a conference of female entrepreneurs in Afghanistan. These women are made of tough stuff, and we could all learn a thing or two about feminism from them.
The Taliban is the world's largest opiate supplier, and as the U.S. ships out of Afghanistan for good, the drug trade is expected to once again be the Taliban's go-to source of income. The United Nations estimates that the money generated annually will be between $300 million and $1.6 billion, most of which comes from drugs. According to one report, the United States unsuccessfully focused on dismantling the Taliban's drug empire with airstrikes and raids, costing the U.S. more than $8 billion over 15 years. Morgan, your thoughts on this?
So the Taliban does make a lot of money off of the drug trade and poppy because it's easy for them. And that's one of the reasons why we were unsuccessful many times in our counter-narcotics efforts, because it's a crop that's easy for them to grow, it's easy for them to sell. One of the things, though, that we were trying to do in the Trump administration, again, Adam Boehler has talked about this, is we tried to bring the Taliban to the table with the government of Afghanistan and say, look, there could be many other economic projects in a joint unified government. Obviously, we handed this over to the Biden administration, and that didn't work. But there's a couple things to remember. While the poppy trade is lucrative for them and it's low-hanging fruit, there are actually things that China and Russia are much more interested in Afghanistan, and that is rare earths and minerals. China has been involved in these mines because of the security situation. They haven't been able to extract the type of value that many people around the world think are in those mines. But this is one of the things that you should watch for: is do the Chinese, now that they've recognized the Taliban, are they able to make significant improvements in those mines? Second thing you need to watch for, we estimate that the government of Afghanistan has about $9 billion in reserve currency in the United States. Congress should immediately put in legislation to block the Taliban to have access to those funds. Finally, third thing you should watch for, Russia and China at the United Nations will likely try through the Security Council to get rid of some of the sanctions that are on the Taliban, because they would like to again, recognize them as the legitimate government of Afghanistan, and I worry that this administration is headed towards that path as well. So yes, they will continue with poppy, but watch for the rare earths and minerals. That's what's really lucrative for the Taliban in the long run.
Thanks, everybody. America Reports now.